So you're on a hike in the woods and you find a skull. Is there any way to know what animal that skull came from without spending like $100,000 at some university and getting a degree in zoology? The answer is yes. It is possible to identify skulls without a big degree. Okay, couple pieces of information you have to know to start with. First of all, you have to have done some research and know the basic animals that live in the habitat that you're hiking around in. For instance, if you're up in the mountains of Idaho, you've got all kinds of, let's see, you've got some fisher and marten, you've got coyote, you've got raccoon, you also have elk and pronghorn, at least in the lower areas of Idaho. You've got black-tailed deer, white-tailed deer. You have a whole range of things. So you have to know the animals that live in that area. The second thing is you have to know the habitat where you found the skull. You see, animals typically are going to live and die in the habitat that suits them best. So for instance, you're not going to find a gopher tortoise skull in a swamp. You're not going to find pronghorn antelope in the Appalachian Mountains. Okay, you're going to find the skulls of the animals where the animal lives is pretty much where it's going to die, pretty close to that. So you have to look around and make note of the habitat where you are. So I'm here in central Alabama. That eliminates some animals from North America and allows for others to be on my list of possibilities for my mystery skull. The other thing I noticed is that I found this in a wetlands type environment. It was near a creek. That creek was flowing out of a lake. And so this is a forested wetlands environment. With those two pieces of information, the rest of it is just being good old-fashioned Sherlock Holmes and trying to look at the clues and eliminate animals that can't possibly fit with the evidence, with the facts that you are finding. To show you the rest of how to do that, come along with me. I've got some skulls from my collection. I'll show you exactly how to read a skull. Because today, we're on the trail of skulls. So we have our mystery skull. Remember, the two pieces of information that you have to have is number one, what habitat are you in? And number two, what animals live in that habitat? With those two pieces of information, the rest is just learning to read the skull. So what do we have? I've got a collection of skulls here so I can show you different features that the skulls will tell you. See, skulls give you a lot of information about themselves. Why? Because the five senses are sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch are all contained within the skull. They're all right here. The only thing that extends to the rest of the body is the sense of touch. At least for mammals anyway. For some insects will sniff with their feet, but insects don't have skulls. So the other five senses, all the five senses are in the skull. The only one that extends to the rest of the body is the sense of touch. The other reason skulls give us tremendous information is that they contain the teeth. And the teeth are where the animal is going to capture and begin to process food. And that act of capturing and processing food is going to tell us a lot about the diet of the animal. So with those two pieces of information, I can begin to, again, play a little Sherlock Holmes. Let's look at the evidence, look at what the skull teaches us, and then eliminate possibilities of animals that do not fit the facts as we're finding them in the skull. So rule number one, and really the only rule about doing this game, is simply this. Do not take a single piece of information and base your identification just on that. You really have to accumulate lots and lots of data in order to be accurate with what you're doing. So we'll start with simply size. You see, the size of a skull is going to be proportional to the size of the animal. I mean, think about it. You are not going to walk around and see a squirrel with a skull like that. The skull is bigger than the squirrel is. So the skulls are going to be proportional to the animal. So if you find a skull that is the size, dropped it. If you find a skull that's the size of the end of your finger, dropped it again. If you find a skull that's the size of the end of your finger, like that one, well, that's a mouse skull. Mouse skulls are the size of the ends of your finger, and they like to jump onto the ground all the time. That's good stuff. If you find a skull that fits within your palm, well, that's a squirrel skull. So most squirrel-sized animals, their skull would fit within your palm. If it's the size of a cat, here's a cat skull. You can see the cat nearly fills my palm. And here's the skull of a coyote. You can see that the skull is like the length of my entire hand. And well, if it's bigger than that, well, gosh, it's going to be bigger than that. So, all right, so the size of the skull is going to be proportional to the size of the animal. So what do we have here with our mystery skull? We have a skull that's a little bit bigger than my palm, but not nearly as long as my hand. So what's our inference then? Is that this skull came from an animal that's a little bit bigger than a cat, but not as big as like a medium-sized dog. So we can eliminate now animals like shrews and mice and rats. We can eliminate animals like deer and bear and things like that. Those are now off the list. To see how the game works? All right, let's keep going. So, next thing we want to look at is we want to look at what's called the foramen magnum. You have a large hole in the bottom of your skull, at least you do, in the bottom, and that's the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum is the hole that allows the spine come from the body and connect up with the brain, which is inside of the brain case right here. Well, the angle that foramen magnum comes in tells us a lot about how the animal would move around, believe it or not. So if you have an animal like human beings, we are bipeds. Our skull is on top of our body, like this green vervet monkey. You can see right there, there's the foramen magnum. Notice that the foramen magnum is under the skull. Under the skull means that the skull is on top of the body. That tends to be a biped. If you have an animal that's more like a reptile, reptiles, turtles, alligators in this case, notice that the foramen magnum comes directly in the back because these animals push their heads in front of them. Okay? So those would be animals that are very low to the ground. I call them belly draggers. Those are the reptiles and amphibians. They tend to have skulls like that, or foramen magnum like that. So if you have an animal where the foramen magnum is in between, it's not coming in horizontal, it's not coming in vertical, it's in between, you typically have a quadruped. Most mammals, with the exception of the primates, are going to be these quadruped types of animals. Now, here's the cool thing. The closer that angle is, the closer that angle is to vertical, the taller that animal's going to be at the shoulder. The closer that angle is to horizontal, the lower that animal's going to be to the ground. So let's check out our mystery skull. Here you can see the foramen magnum, and there is the angle. That is very close to horizontal and not even nearly close to vertical. What does that tell us? That tells us that this animal, being a little bit bigger than a cat, was fairly low to the ground. It was not a very tall animal. All right, is that enough information? No, let's keep going. The eyes, you know, the poet tells us that the eyes are the window to the soul. Also true with skulls. The eyes tell us lots of information. For instance, if I have an animal that is a predator, predators have to sneak up on their prey. So their ability to judge distances must be very, very keen, because you need to be able to know how far that prey animal is away from you in order to be able to know that you can outrun it and attack it and kill it before it runs away from you. So you're going to have eyes that are pointing mostly forward. So for instance, in this coyote, you can see that the angle of those eyes is more forward than it is sideways. Coyotes have a good depth perception, a lot of binocular vision to help them with that. Compare that with an animal like a pronghorn, and you can see that the eyes in this pronghorn are nearly sideways. They're facing very much sideways. That's because pronghorns eat grass. They're not concerned about the grass running away from them, okay? They don't have to judge the distance between them and the grass because the grass doesn't run, right? So they are more interested in having a good peripheral vision in order to look out for these guys who might be sneaking through the tall grasses or the shrubbery, coming after them to prey on them. So eyes forward, a lot more likely to be a predator. Eyes sideways, a lot more likely to be an herbivore, a prey animal. So let's check out our mystery skull. Here are the eyes right here, and they are on that angle just like that. Well, by golly, guess what? That's a 45-degree angle, right in the middle. What does that tell us? Well, my thought is that it tells us this. This animal is both predator and prey. Predator and prey. Think about its small size. It's going to be on the menu for some of the larger animals. So it makes sense that the eyes are going to be somewhat in the middle. What else do the eyes tell us? Well, the eyes can also tell us this. Have you ever been to a matinee movie where you come there and it's the middle of the afternoon and you're in that movie for 2 hours and it's all dark and you step out of the exit into the sunlight and your eyes squint really tight, because it hurts? Okay, that's because the brighter the light, the smaller you want your eyes, because the glare actually can wipe out some of your vision. Where at nighttime, your pupils open, they dilate, and that allows in more light to give you better vision. Animals that are nocturnal tend to have larger eyes than animals that are diurnal. Nocturnal, active at night, diurnal, active in the daytime. This is for free, but crepuscular is active sunrise and sunset. Lazy is just not active at all, but you don't need to know that. All right, so let's take an animal, for instance. Let's look at this animal. This is a bear. Notice how large that eye is compared with the size of the skull. All right, that's really not a very large eye given the size. I'll prove it to you. That is a cat, and the eye of that cat is almost the same size as the eye of the bear, but look how much smaller that skull is. Cats tend to be nocturnal, bears tend to be diurnal. So that's an example. The larger the eye, the more nocturnal of the habits of that animal. So let's check out our mystery skull. Here we have the eyes right here. Notice that they're really not that large compared to the overall size of the skull. Those eyes are only about the size of just like the tip of my finger. They're not that large. Inference, this animal is probably a diurnal animal. It's going to be one that's active in the daytime. Still not enough information. There's more to learn. Let's keep going. So, the teeth. Teeth are going to tell us a lot too. Remember, the teeth are where we can capture and begin to process the food that we eat. So an animal like an herbivore is going to have enlarged incisors that are going to be used for snipping and cutting plant material. Okay? They're also going to have very flat cheek teeth. These molars and premolars back here, very flat for grinding up plant material. Plant material is really hard to digest. Think about the difference between eating a hot dog and eating a carrot. Carrots are really hard to grind up compared to a hot dog. So, other herbivores, you can see the rabbit right here, no orange on the front, has these grooved teeth in the front, and there's actually underneath, there's a couple of extra teeth under there. So rabbits and those animals have 4 teeth up front. Rodents, like this beaver here, they have the orange in the front. Rodents, squirrels, beavers, mice, things like that. Okay, if you're a carnivore, you're gonna have these large canines like this. Canines are for grasping and killing the food. These teeth here, notice they're not flat at all. They are nice and pointed. That's to allow them, these are called the carnassial teeth, or the meat teeth. And what that allows the carnivores to be able to bite off chunks of meat and throw it down and let their stomach do the rest. This is why if you have a cat or a dog, as the cat or a dog maybe catches something that it's eating or it's playing with a toy, you'll notice that it'll hold whatever it is it's playing with, it'll hold it between its paws, and then it turns its head sideways. Like that. That's engaging those cheek teeth to tear into that meat. You typically don't see herbivores doing that. You see herbivores going snip, 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 and then chew, chew, chew. That's what they do because they're processing plants in a different way. So let's check out our mystery skull. Here you can see very prominent canines, and the teeth underneath are very jagged and pointed. That indicates, in agreement with the eyes, that this guy is going to be a meat eater. Even though he's on the diet, he's going to be a meat eater. All right, let's keep going. What else do we have? Let's look at the profile of this animal. Okay, if you're an animal that's going to be living in the forest and out here in the open air, all right, you can have all different kinds of shaped head. Here's a wild boar. You can have a big sloped head like this. Here's a deer. You can have big antlered head like this, okay? You can have big, huge prominences and things and slopes and bumps. You can have big ridges like this and a big domed shaped skull. That's if you're out and living in the land. If you are in and out of the water, you want to be a little bit more streamlined. Let's go back to my friend the beaver. You can see the beaver has just a slight dome to its head, but otherwise it's pretty flat. As a matter of fact, not only is it flat, but look at the angle of the eyes. They're looking up so that they can perceive things above the water, okay? So that's an indication that an animal is semi-aquatic, going to be in and out of the water. So lots of swoops and slopes and domes and antlers, probably a terrestrial animal, very flat profile, typically going to be semi-aquatic. Let's check out our mystery skull. That is a very flat skull. And if you notice, the eye is on a slight upturn compared to other animals which were more horizontal. That tells me that this animal is more than likely going to be a semi-aquatic animal. So now, we got lots of pieces of information by learning to read these skulls. Let's review some of them. Looking at the size, we know this animal is a little bit larger than the cat, but not as large as, let's say, a medium-sized dog. We know that it's a four-legged animal, low to the ground. We know that it's going to be a carnivore, even though it's still on the menu. We know it's active in the daytime, and we know that it is going to be in and out of water on a regular basis, probably to do its hunting. You put all those pieces of information together, and I can eliminate here in central Alabama, in a wetlands habitat, I can eliminate everything off the list of the animals that live in this area except for one animal. Do you have a guess what you think our mystery animal is? If you guessed river otter, you would be correct. This is the skull of an otter. Now, sometimes you can't get down and identify the animal automatically. Sometimes you might get down to maybe two possibilities. That's okay. You can look at a reference book or go online and look for the skulls, pictures of the skulls of those animals, and then you can compare it and you have a little bit better sense of what those but you don't have to spend like looking at 20 different animal skulls. You can narrow it down fairly easily to maybe 1, 2, or 3. Now you have the ability, by answering those questions, looking at the clues that the skull gives you, now you have the ability to get in there and really explore and be that Sherlock Holmes for these skulls and figure out what it is that you're finding. I'm telling you, when you can do stuff like that, your enjoyment of the outdoors just ramps up when you realize the animals that are around you. And that is how you can read a skull. I'm Gregg Thompson. I'll see you on the trail.